Welcome to our audience and to our panelists. Today, it seems so fitting to have a conversation about mental health, mental illness, recovery, and family, as this is Mental Health Awareness Week, although truly every day needs to be Mental Health Awareness Day. My name is Rebecca Troop. I'm the Vice President of Community Relations at Seacoast Mental Health Center. For anyone who doesn't know, Seacoast Mental Health Center is one of New Hampshire's 10 community mental health centers, with physical locations in Portsmouth and Exeter. We see clients via telehealth and in person in both of our offices, as well as in our emergency services department through our emergency service line in the emergency department at Exeter Hospital. We are co-located in area schools, and we are in some of the primary care offices around the region. As a community mental health center entity in New Hampshire, we provide a broad array of comprehensive, high quality, and effective mental health services for children, adolescents, their families, adults, and the elderly who reside in the eastern half of Rockingham County, regardless of the ability to pay. I am so thrilled to introduce our guests, authors and mother-daughter team, Sonja Wasden and Rachel Siddoway, and our moderator, Patty Driscoll of Seacoast Mental Health Center. I'll give a couple brief pieces of information about our event, then I'm going to introduce our amazing speakers, and then turn it over to Patty to have a fabulous discussion. You all are logged in. You can see at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A box. Please feel free to put in questions, which will come to me. I will be moderating a Q&A after the discussion amongst Patty and Rachel and Sonja. We will get to as many questions as we can, and hopefully you have a truly valuable and worthwhile experience. So without any further ado, let me give some brief introductions to our panelists. Sonja Wasden has spent over 30 years managing her bipolar, anxiety, and OCD disorders. Her book, called An Impossible Life, shares her story about her struggles with mental illness, her family's history with suicide and mental health crises, her work to shatter stigma, and how she has created truly a life worth living. Her daughter, Rachel Siddoway, shares her mother's and her family's stories about life with mental illness. When Rachel speaks, she speaks about how mental illness affects the entire family unit and how often people with mental illness and their families feel helpless and hopeless. Yet her message is always one of hope and of growth, and we really hope you get a lot from it. Together, they wrote a book called The Impossible Life, which tells the story of when Sonja was 35 and involuntarily committed into a psychiatric facility by her father and her husband. At the time, a mother of 3, she was living a beautiful life in the suburbs, and it seemed like everything externally was ideal. But in this gripping and breathtaking narrative, she will make you feel as if you're talking to her through a private conversation. She tells this truly compelling account about her struggle with depression, mania, eating disorders, suicide, her path of marriage and motherhood, and really the grit that it took to stay alive and to stay vigilant throughout this process. An Impossible Life is truly an unforgettable story of perseverance when all hope seems lost. It is intriguing and heartfelt. I could not put it down. And I strongly encourage after this discussion that you consider reading or listening to the book. Both women have been interviewed over 50 times on news stations, including ABC, Fox, CBS, and NBC, and they've been touring the country to get out their message of hope and shattering stigma. Our moderator, Patty Driscoll, is the Adult Services Director at Seacoast Mental Health Center. She's been here since the mid-2012, and she has devoted her entire career to serving mental health and individuals for the past 32 years. For the past 15 years, she's held management positions, but she is always still in close contact with client work. Our clients here know Patty, they know her devotion to them, both children and adults, and she is on the forefront of care at any time that it's needed within our center outside of her management duties. Her decades of experience have truly helped support both children and their families and adults throughout the years. Patty has a BS and a master's in psychology and social work from Hobart and William Smith Colleges and the University of Buffalo in New York State. But enough from me. I am now going to turn this over to Patty to have an open and honest and raw discussion with Sonja and Rachel.
Quote, writing this book with my mother was a love letter to her. Yeah, I'm not crying. No, this is just allergies. No. I read that. It's one of the first things you read when you open the book. Wow, I will say. And tell us what you meant by that.
So throughout my childhood, I've learned different things about my mom's illness or what bipolar means. But it wasn't until interviewing her for months that I got to really understand her as just a person, not as my mom, but just this strong woman who has been through a lot and who, because of the choices she made, lets the book have a happy ending. So in my author's note, I just wanted to let the reader in on that secret of, for me, this is more than just a story about a strong woman. This is a story about a woman who's overcome so much, and I want to show my love for her strength through a book that took a lot of time to write. So it was really powerful to work together on that.
Wow, thank you. Well, you accomplished what you set out to do, and just a tremendous way to say that. So thank you. All right, so Sonja, if you could just maybe take a little time just to tell us about yourself. We'd like to know who you are, what you enjoy in life and how you see the world, and just anything you want to tell us about you. And then also sort of lead then into when you sort of recognized maybe that there was something more serious that was going on with you that might have required some professional help. So we can see you, as a person and who you are, and then understand how you came to understand yourself with a mental illness.
Yes. So today I'm living a beautiful life and I'm thriving, but that always wasn't the case. When I was admitted to the psychiatric hospital against my will by my husband and father, I was very resistant to admitting that I had a problem or that there was anything wrong, even though every day felt like I was walking on broken glass because of the stigma, which often is, right, the mentally ill or crazy, lazy, attention seeking. I just couldn't accept that I had an illness. But when I was in the psychiatric hospital, I got diagnosed as bipolar, and that started my journey towards treatment. But I still was resistant. It took me a long time, which I hope it doesn't take other people. And I think the turning point for me was after my attempted suicide. I realized how vulnerable I was and that I almost died. And then when my husband was the CEO of that hospital I was taken to, and a leading psychiatrist there told him, never bring her back to this hospital again. Take her somewhere where people don't know you. And it was just aha moment where I thought, wait, if I had had a heart attack, would the doctor tell my husband to never bring me back here again? And it just made me feel like I'm done hiding. I'm no longer going to resist this. And I got into DBT, dialectical therapy, got on better medicine, a better psychiatrist, and really plowed my way through a journey of where now I'm a mental health advocate, great marriage, great relationships, and thriving and enjoying life. I paint, I go on walks. I still have the illness and I have to manage it. It's not like it's just disappeared, but I have the skills to manage it. And I have a life that is definitely beautiful.
Wow, thank you. How did it feel when you first got the diagnosis of, was bipolar disorder the first one? I know there's some anxiety and OCD, but was bipolar the primary diagnosis that you received? And what was that like to get that diagnosis?
I'm bipolar, I'm obsessive compulsive, and I have an anxiety disorder where I have panic attacks.
Okay.
And I would say getting the diagnosis was devastating and a relief, because it's devastating. Nobody wants a lifelong illness that you have to deal with, and the stigma and all of that. But it was relief that finally I had a diagnosis and I knew what was wrong with me and what was happening. And it did, like I said, it started me on the journey of treatment.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you. Can you talk a little bit more, Sonja? We've brought up stigma. I think, you know, it seems like one of the primary reasons that you and your daughter and your family, because we have learned that there's some more books coming out from other family members in the future, and we're thrilled to hear that. Really, it seems the mission, that one of the primary messages is of hope and recovery, but part of that is helping the bigger community understand the disease of mental illness and reduce the stigma. If you could talk about, you've mentioned a few examples about the stigma that you experienced, but if you could talk a little bit more about how you see what you're doing and the mission here and what needs to happen in order for the stigma of mental illness to be shattered, we hope, right? I mean,
Yeah.
as you mentioned, it should be compared to any medical disease. You could
Yes.
just maybe share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I feel like that we all need to be courageous in coming forward and speaking openly and candidly about our mental health. Because a lot of people get uncomfortable when you talk about your mental health. You might feel more comfortable talking about your physical health, but your mental health and physical health are equally important. And I feel like, yes, I have faced stigma, like from this, you know, it's even in the mental health community, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes. But I feel like when we talk more openly and candidly about our mental health, then it makes other people feel comfortable talking about it. Or like suicide can be a conversation killer, when really, if we talk about it, it can be a lifesaver. And so when we normalize these conversations and learn how to talk about them and how to feel comfortable about talking about them, I think it makes other people feel more comfortable coming forward about their own. But when there's stigma and we don't talk about it, then people don't want to talk about it because they feel like, oh, it's hush hush, we don't talk about that. I don't want you to think I'm like, even like there's like 84% of people in the workforce reported not talking about their mental health in the workplace, or lying about why they're taking days off when it's for mental health things, because they don't feel comfortable. They feel like they're going to look down upon, or that they're not capable, or people will treat them different. So I think we need to come forward and be more honest.
Okay, thank you. I know when we talked on the phone a little bit prior to this event, I shared a little bit about something that we're seeing, I think, that reflects the process for stigma to be reduced. I do see in obituaries, we are seeing that the reason, the cause of death could be something, for example, lost their courageous battle with depression, which certainly sounds like that probably was a suicide. With overdose deaths, saying specifically they lost their battle, with substances. And to me, the importance of that previously, or you still see it, died unexpectedly, or not giving any explanation at all. And to me, being able, like you and your family, putting yourself, your story, your pain, your reality out there helps to normalize it. And it's like it's the ripple effect, that other people start to get that maybe sense of bravery, sense that they're not the only one, being able to see someone like you and your family be able to recover and thrive despite having the mental illness, really helps other people to be able to do the same. So it's really about the ripple effect of people like you and your family that are willing to do this. So thank you. Do you mind talking a little bit about the impact of your suicide attempt? And first Sonja and then Rachel, talk about that event, since that's a pretty pivotal event, as you've mentioned. If you can share a little bit about that with us, whatever you are comfortable sharing.
What's really tough, I don't want to get emotional, but I lost my father to suicide. So you would think that I was fully aware of the type of devastation that causes to a family, and the family, even me, having suicide urges and struggling with suicide, having my father die from suicide. I did ask the questions most people ask: what could I have done to save him? And what more could have I done? But yet I got in so much pain. I got to that place where you're not thinking straight, and you just become in so much pain. You don't think about your family. You don't think about your children. You just think they would be better off without you. And I did get to that point and attempt to take my own life. And it really, really hit home. Like I said, it was the aha moment for me that I had had suicide in my family. My father died. And then for me to go attempt, that really was a pivotal moment where people need to realize it doesn't have to be that way, that there is hope out there. And now I have a suicide safety plan, right? Those are out there, that I have a suicide safety plan. So if I ever have that come upon me or those urges, I have a suicide safety plan that I have in place to help protect me and my life.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I know that that's difficult, and about your dad too. So thank you. So Rachel, what was that like for you and the rest of the family, if you can speak for them or just for yourself?
Yeah, so I would say suicide is a tricky thing because it's kind of, it's hard to say it's a choice, but it is. You're not dying without some conscious thought of wanting to. So as a daughter or as a child, or I'm sure as a spouse, you're kind of, you're really upset. Like when my mom told me she had done that, I was so hurt and just angry. And I think with a lot of deaths, we can be angry at God, but I was angry at her because I was like, why would you do that to us? Like, your dad died. You know what you were doing when you made that choice. And I don't know if it's maturing or just having open conversations with her, but I've realized she didn't want to leave me or my family. She just wanted to leave the pain she was in. And she would ask me, is it fair of you to make me stay? Is it fair of you to stay in all this pain just because you want me as a mom? And those are conversations that are really confusing as a kid. You're like, I don't know. Death is just not supposed to be okay. But what's good is through having really raw, open conversations with her, I was able to see her pain more clearly, while also being so grateful that she, survived it. And I was able to be open back with her and tell her why she has to take suicide off the table. That just can't be an option. Because it wrecks families, and it creates, a domino effect of, if my grandpa did it and she did it, then would my brother, who's bipolar, think, well, it's just a matter of time. Why even try to stay alive?
Right. Thank you. How did you work through your anger? Do you know and understand the process by which you no longer were angry at your mom for attempting suicide?
I think for me, what helped the anger was being able to yell at her. I don't know if that's recommended for everyone, but I just know, like, when you're really mad at a choice someone made, it really can be healing to just look that person in the face and tell them exactly what they did and why it hurt you and how wrong you think they are for doing it. Even if I'm at fault or not, saying everything right, I'm like, it does feel good just to let her know, do you hear me? And then for her to say, yes, I hear what you are saying. I validate that. Now can you hear my point of view? So I think it was just having a person that's so open to talk about it. And obviously I was ready to hear it. I wasn't, wanting to be left alone or ignore her. I wanted to hear why she did it.
Thank you. Your point about recognizing that your mom didn't want to leave her family, who clearly she loves. It's the prevailing theme in the book. It wasn't about that. And for your mom, Sonja, you saying that you're not in your right mind when you get that close to and you actually attempt suicide. Those are important things to hear. Sometimes we hear people say it's a selfish act. And we really need to make sure that we're dispelling that myth because of what you're saying. It isn't about wanting to die and doing that to your family. It's an irrational state of mind due to a disease of the mind that is much more about ending the pain and suffering than it is about ending your life. Is that fair to say, both of you, Sonja?
I want to say something about that. That is absolutely true.
Yeah.
That people say it's a selfish act. And I say, until you have been there.
Right.
And I tell people, you know what? They didn't take their life. They died from suicide. They died from suicide. And like you said, my mind was sick. My father's mind was sick. Those people's minds are sick. It is a sickness. And those people who are wanting to take their life, I want them to tell them, you know what? You are sick. Get help. Just like if you had a broken leg, go get help. And I can't stress enough how we need to talk about suicide and open it up and open the conversations. And for those like me who have lost people to suicide, you know what? He was very, very sick at the time. He was not himself, and he died from suicide. He did not kill himself. He died from suicide.
Yes. Thank you. The language. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, I
Please.
just wanted to make one quick point. So what I find so interesting is that the human instinct is to survive. Like even animals, you see our biology, everything. It's like, it's just instinct to want to survive. So in order for someone's brain or body to go completely against that and want to die is so unnatural that clearly it's a sickness, or clearly it's such a heightened amount of pain that you can't think through it. You can't see clarity. So I would just say, like, if anyone's lost someone to suicide or is contemplating suicide, just keep that in mind. Like for you to go against your body's natural instincts of survival, clearly you need help, or, you know, they were really, really sick when they thought to do it.
That's a really great, I think, really important way to say that. Absolutely. The language is important. We've been working, our agency has adopted the Zero Suicide Initiative. So it's an initiative that's national, probably international, to really help providers and any kind of business or people to really look at understanding and recognizing that suicide is typically a fleeting, sometimes it's, you know, the thoughts are, you know, can be constant, but the crisis can be fleeting, and it's a crisis of severe pain and suffering, not a crisis of wanting to die. So it can be prevented. So doing things to promote that it can be prevented, and that it's not a selfish act, it's not a crime. So our language has changed. We don't say commit suicide anymore, right? Because to say commit suicide, it sounds like, you know, you're saying that the person committed a crime. It's not a crime to feel so desperate and in pain that that's what you think about to get out of the pain. So that's part of the stigma too, right? Changing the language around how we talk about these things. Yeah. Sonja, are you comfortable sharing anything about your suicide safety plan and what's on that? Just in general, we might have some people that have their own, or are considering having their own, or developing one, that are listening tonight.
Yeah, and the great thing about Google is you can Google suicide safety plan. It will walk you through how to do it. But mine is, we have no guns in the house. If I have suicidal thoughts or urges, I know my husband takes my medication. I make sure that I never have more than 15 days of medication, and then my husband takes it, and then I put more in just to keep me safe. I do want people to know suicide, like you said, is preventable. And they've done studies on that, is 100% preventable. And like you said, in my suicide safety plan, I have statements that I've written down and I read. I have people, who do I contact if I start having suicidal feelings or urges. I have people that know they're on my contact list and I call them. I have the suicide hotline on my safety plan. I have statements that I read that, yes, I'm not going to always feel this way, where you think, oh, I'm like what you said, I'm always going to feel this way. I got to get out of the pain, where you can do mindfulness and meditation and accept that you're in pain. It doesn't take the pain away. Let me be clear. Yes, you have to sit in that pain, but it will pass. Things will get better. And I think you also made another point that in my book, when the doctor came talk to me, you know what? I wanted to live. I did not want to die. I think all of us do want to live. We want to have that life, but the pain, like you said, becomes so great that we just feel like we have to get out of it in that moment. But anyway, yes, to anyone out there who has ever struggled with suicide, go look up and get your suicide safety plan. I am a big promoter of that.
Thank you. So Rachel, this is the $64,000 question, I guess, or, in a nutshell, tell us how your mom's illness impacted you and your family, and whatever you want to focus on about what that impact was.
All right. I would say her illness has affected me and my family in every aspect. I don't think there's not a part of my life it hasn't touched. And that can be a hard thing, but also a beautiful thing. Because I feel like the way I view other people, the compassion I give to people who are suffering, or I've noticed I give other people more slack, like as far as how much rope I give them before coming up with my own conclusion of why they're behaving the way they're behaving. Whether it's because growing up, my mom went to Walmart without shoes on and week-old clothes covered in stains and was, 100 pounds overweight. I look at a lot of people who are at Walmart in their pajamas or things like that, and my first thought isn't, oh, they're trashy people, or, oh my gosh, they must be having a horrible day. I don't know why. I'm just like, oh, they're just people. Like, my mom looks like that, and she's just a person. So I think having a mom with an illness like my mom, I look at it as a blessing in my life. A lot of people, and this kind of shows stigma as well, they'll ask me when I tell them she's bipolar, they're like, how did you turn out so normal? And I'm like, as opposed to what? Like, am I supposed to behave manic and depressive just because my mom struggles with that? So I feel like my mom's, I don't know. I think she is such a cute person. Like, she just is the cutest person. And because of the things she struggles with, I'm able to see other people's struggles and go, oh, I get that. People who are these cute, beautiful souls can also have demons.
That's so sweet. And you can see it in your face. I'm sure the audience can see the real genuine and sincere things that you're saying. It's just so wonderful. Anything, Rachel, that your family might do differently? The sort of hindsight is 20/20, armchair quarterbacking, whatever the term you want to use. Do you guys talk about that now? Is there anything you might have done differently back in the earlier days?
Oh, yeah.
And advice for other people that might be in the same situation?
Yeah. So my mom went undiagnosed for far too long. I mean, to get diagnosed in your late 30s, I mean, that's a lot of life to have under your belt before. And her dad didn't get diagnosed till he was in like his 70s or late 60s. So I talk with my dad a lot about this, and we often are like, oh, if we could have gone back, we would have just started with dialectical behavioral therapy, so DBT therapy. It's just the golden standard of therapy. Or, I think what's hard when you're new to a mental illness, because there is no x-ray that can just say, this is what's wrong and here's how we treat it. You kind of are in this abstract place with doctors a lot of the time when you're like, they're not happy. We don't know why. And the doctors can sometimes say, yeah, it could be these 10 things, but we don't really know why either. And so something my dad said is he wished he did more research on his own, and that he maybe pushed on doctors a little more. Not that they're wrong, but more just like, can we dig a little deeper? Or you said it might be this, but I don't think that's it. where I think we kind of just went with it more because we're like, well, I don't know, and they're the professional. And it can just be a very vague place. And then a lot of years can go by where you just are untreated or not being treated in the best way.
Right. I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. A lot of us just accept, right, maybe something that the doctor says, as you said, you know, they're the professionals, and then, you know, sort of it just becomes kind of normal, you know, to you, and you don't really know any different. So I will share that when I was reading the book earlier on after some of the, the psychiatric intervention, I was like yelling in the book. I'm like, why isn't anybody recommending DBT? You know, and when they finally did, and Sonja had said in the book, your mom said in the book that DBT, or also in talking with your mom, that it saved her life. I'm not saying, you know, criticizing anything that didn't happen sooner, but thank goodness that that did happen, because as your mom said, it saved her life. So maybe asking both of you to share a little bit with us around, there are some people that are therapists, clinical people in the audience tonight. Maybe share a little bit about your experience in that, like the do's and the don'ts, I guess, around how professionals should interact, and what's helpful and what isn't helpful, particularly around maybe a new diagnosis or somebody who's, you know, initially struggling.
I would say one of the biggest, therapists are key in people creating a life worth living. And one of the greatest gifts one of my therapists gave me is she normalized my mental health condition. She said, Sonja, an illness is an illness. And maybe you have to live your life a little bit differently, which I do because I'm managing a mental health issue. She says people with diabetes, people with Parkinson's, people with chronic pain, they're all living their life differently too. You're not the only one. You're not alone. And then also, I think therapists need to teach patients and their families to be more of an advocate for themselves, to advocate for themselves, and to teach them. One of my other therapists taught me how to have grace, compassion, and patience as you go through this journey of learning skills and how to manage it, and medication. It can be very daunting, and people can think, none of this is working. Nothing's going to help. And you have to have patience and grace and compassion for yourself as you figure out what medicine works for you, what therapy works for you. And I would tell the therapist, focus on skills. Teach them skills so that they can actually use to take home and manage their episodes.
Excellent, thank you. Rachel, what do you have to say from the family perspective?
I would say, just to reiterate the skills thing, even if you're a psychiatrist and you're meant to prescribe pills, pairing that with skills is an amazing superpower. So if you know anything about DBT or just like skills on how to manage these emotions, you can obviously use your expertise on their pills, but then also say, have you heard of this? Or have you tried this when you're at a 10, you know? One thing I would say as well, though, is a lot of patients who go to see mental health specialists, they're either at the end of their, like they're at a breaking point or they're about to get into one. And so showing love and like a sense of calm with them is so important, because if you freak your patient out by making them feel isolated, alone, or like they're a trauma case, they're going to get more escalated. But if you look at them, like my mom was saying, and go, you are not alone. This is an illness like any other illness. Your brain is part of your body. So if you're having an issue with your brain, it is a physical illness. Mm-hmm. So, and then another thing I would say is not to generalize people. I know it's very helpful in studies to go, okay, typically people with this look like this, or people with schizophrenia look like this. But when a patient walks in, I know my mom's had a lot of scenarios where she felt like they were kind of just looking at her like she's a textbook case. It's like, okay, she's just a list of symptoms and we're going to plug her into this system. But if you look at people as individuals and go, okay, they have their own vulnerabilities, they have their own little package, and yes, she might fit the bipolar mold, but she also might need, like my brother's bipolar and she's bipolar, and they have completely different things that work and don't work for them. So I would say individualizing people, even though they might have a shared diagnosis.
Thank you. How about including the family in the education about the illness and about what to do to support the family and how the illness impacts the family, and also how does the family help support the person with the illness? Maybe
Oh, and I want to,
Sonja.
yeah.
Go ahead, Sonja.
I want to say something about that. I totally agree with you. All of my children and my husband have met with DBT therapists, and they've met with therapists to deal with, you know, some of the trauma they've had with my attempted suicide and their grandfather. But additionally, they have met with DBT therapists of learning skills to how to help me, how to talk with me, interpersonal relationship skills, what to do when I'm having a panic attack. They have all met with therapists also in getting skills on how to handle someone with some of these mental health challenges.
I would say, as far as the family goes, it is a game changer for the family to have the same DBT knowledge, or to go see therapists for themselves and talk with them and say, okay, what is going on? Because if you have someone in your family who's sick with bipolar or whatever mental challenge they have, and they're getting the help they need and they're getting their therapy done, if the family is at square one and doesn't get any of it, there's only so far that family member can go, because either through your rhetoric or behavior, you're going to be putting them in patterns that go against what therapy is teaching them. So I would say and I love that my mom shares things she's learning too, but yeah, all of my family members have met with DBT specialists. We've all learned the skills. And so we can aid her whenever she's not doing well. I can say, oh, you know, you're at a 10, maybe you should do tips, you know, put your face in ice water and all that. But at the same time, like my mom mentioned, it helps us also regulate ourselves, because sometimes people with mental health challenges can be kind of hard to have relationships with. And so, or at least lasting relationships, sustainable relationships with. And when you have two people in a relationship, both getting skills, I mean, that is an amazing scenario.
Wow.
So I would say they both got to get the skills.
Thank you. That's tremendously helpful and important advice, and coming from you guys, even more valuable since your lived experience. So thank you. All right, so we're getting probably towards the end of this part, which I'm a little sad about, because I would just love to continue to learn from the two of you, but we probably need to wrap up this part. So two things that I'd like to, just two quick things, I think. If both of you wouldn't mind sharing, you know, one or two takeaways that you hope the audience takes away from tonight's discussion. Sonja, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I would say hope. I want people out there to know, if you have a loved one that has a mental illness, or you have mental health conditions, that if I am living proof that people with mental health conditions can thrive, they can have a good marriage, they can work, hold down a job, they can have good relationships with families and friends. And if I can do it, anyone can do it. But it does take medication, therapy, and skills, and a team of people and support. But treatment can work.
Great. Rachel?
I would say the most important takeaway I could give is to assume good intent. There are so many times I've wondered, is this my mom? Is this the illness? You know, who should I hold accountable? Or I don't know. There's just been so many things where I've thought, I'm not going to let the illness get away with this. Like, I'm going to make my mom be responsible for this decision. She can't just keep saying it's because she's bipolar or things like that. And what I've learned is I just needed to assume good intent and go, this person I know to be a good person. what they're dealing with is harder than I can even imagine. And so I'm going to choose to trust they are doing their best. When you trust someone is doing their best, it changes the whole relationship. So I think just trusting the person is doing their best.
Great advice. Thank you. And for those of you who haven't read or listened to the book, you're not going to understand this question. And you know what? Then go out and get the book. But here's my question to Sonja. Do you still have the chocolate cupboard? I need to know, what's the status of the chocolate cupboard?
Yes, yes, I still have the chocolate cupboard.
All right.
It is stacked full of chocolate, and it's still one of my medications that I use to survive.
All right, great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Rebecca has joined us. I think it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you, ladies. So thank you so much. And I think we're moving into the Q&A part of our time, and we have 15 minutes. So.
Okay, thank you, the three of you. That was really amazing. I've been sitting here in the background just cheering while I'm listening to all of this and getting all emotional at the same time. And we do have quite a number of questions that have come in. And while most of them are for Rachel, I've been scribbling them all down. So I'm gonna have to look down to look at my notes. But while most of them have come in for Rachel and Sonja, there are a couple from Patty also for people I think that are interested in sort of, you know, how do I bring this into where I live? But I think that, and some of these may have been answered in different ways, but I do want to ask people's questions. And this one's for Sonja. Someone asked, if you had to pick the number one thing that has supported you throughout your recovery, what would you say that was?
I would say the number one thing that has supported me through recovery has been dialectical behavior therapy. I know we want to say family, and family is great supportive, but for me and my illness, when I'm thinking, if this person's talking about, I have an illness, what's my number one supportive thing? I would say dialectical behavior therapy was a game changer.
And you discovered that about 20 years into?
No, I've only had that about 20 years into it. So I've had dialectical behavior therapy for about 7-8 years.
Okay. So thinking about that, then a question for Patty. So thinking about, you know, Sonja had a diagnosis and then had about 2 decades of time trying all these different ways to manage and live with, you know, an ongoing chronic disease of the mind. Why do you think, Patty, from your clinical experience, do you think that sometimes it takes clinicians or therapists that long to recommend something like that for someone?
So I think I'll maybe generalize with other types of, you know, DBT, but also maybe other evidence-based therapeutic modalities that are out there. I think particularly with DBT, there's kind of stringent criteria for the person who's supposed to most benefit from DBT. And it's a diagnostic profile that is called a borderline personality disorder, which is the treatment of DBT was developed mostly in response to professionals not really knowing how best to manage a person with borderline personality disorder. So I think sometimes people may not be referred or may not be offered that service if that's not, you know, their diagnostic profile. Mm-hmm. So I do think sometimes that happens. It's like, oh, well, they don't have borderline personality disorder, so no GBT, whereas GBT really is tremendously helpful, as you've heard, for anyone who has overwhelming emotions and developing skills to manage emotional regulation and decision making in interpersonal relationships. So I think that's part of it. I think that, you know, for some professionals, some of the evidence-based services like DBT are, you have to be specially trained, and there's certification and there's training that can take time, that can be cost, prohibitive for some people. There's administrative burden with providing an evidence-based practice like that. So I think sometimes that might, or people aren't as familiar with some of these, or they're not looking at the person as a whole. They're only looking at what are you presenting. So here's what I'm going to give you, and not sort of looking at the whole person and seeing that, many different clinical modalities can possibly help the person, and not being so rigid about it. I think that might, I don't know, but that's my answer. And
I think it's a good answer.
I was going to say, you guys can't see, but both Sonja and Rachel are nodding, and I feel very validated.
Yes,
So thank you.
yes. I had people say later they didn't recommend it because I wasn't borderline personality disorder. So yes,
Okay.
you hit it. Yes.
Yay for me. All right, good. Thank you.
I have quite a number of different questions where and this is my read of this, it seems as if there may be a number of people, or there are a number of questions around family members of people who may have a diagnosed mental illness, or they are guessing need a diagnosis. And so a couple of these I think I'm going to direct to Rachel, but then I'd love for Sonja, you to answer it from your perspective. We were having a conversation earlier about the differences and the amazing thing of when one person goes through an illness of any kind, those closest to them also go through that illness, but from an entirely different lens. And how important that is to remember, and to remember that you cannot put yourself in that other person's seat on either side. So somebody had asked, what is the number one thing, Rachel, that you would say a family member should not do as it relates to someone in their life who's going through a mental health challenge?
I would say the number one thing you should not do is try to be their therapist. You are too close to the situation. There's no way you can come as an unbiased representative. I think as with trying to be their therapist, or with coming at it combatively, I've seen my own, some not personal family members, but extended family members, try to come in a little too aggressive. And I think they're just like, I'm going to come down, shake down the house. They need help. I see it. They don't see it. And they just come on really aggressive, which it doesn't help people. It makes them want to if you push on anything, it wants to push back. So I would say always coming at things from a place of love, of I value you. I value our relationship. And because of that, I would love to help you get help. Instead of saying, I'm, some savior complex of I'll be the person to save you and you need me. No one wants to feel like that. So I would say don't be their therapist, and don't come on aggressive.
And Sonja, do you have any thoughts around that from the seat that you sat in?
Yeah, I would say, coming from someone who struggled, I think the greatest thing that my friend Lori and my husband, getting me admitted to the psychiatric ward, or my friend Lori hooking me up to dialectical behavior therapy, is you help them find the resources. And you guys obviously are one of the resources, right? So they know where to go now. So I would say get them to the resources. And like Rachel said, lead them with love. Don't try to be their resource, but take their hand and help them get the resources. Don't just say to them, go get help. Well, maybe they're not able to. Maybe they're too depressed. Maybe they're too weak. Maybe it's too hard. Take their hand and help them find the resources.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. This is someone else who asked, I have mental illness in my family. How do I know if I have it? So as I read that, and I don't want to translate for somebody, but how does somebody who maybe is younger, or doesn't feel like they maybe have a certain mental health challenge, what signs should they look out for, which I understand obviously will change based upon what the mental illness is. But like in your case, Rachel, you mentioned that your brother has now been diagnosed with bipolar. From Rachel, from your perspective as a child who watched a line of family members have a similar mental illness, how does that change your lens of what you look for within yourself?
Yes, that is a fascinating question. So I would say, I think it's very natural to just assume, oh, if they have it, I mean, I bet I have it. And then you start looking for symptoms within yourself. My teenage years, I went through severe depression, anxiety. I came up with all these little, health fears. I thought I had cancer for years, and I would go to the dermatologist like once a month to have her check every little freckle on me. So I feel like like being worried that you have it, that's a normal fear. I wouldn't say that means like, oh, it's probably because you have reason to worry. But at the same time, if you do have it, like my brother would, you can really only find that out till you're older. I mean, past 18, and even then some doctors will be hesitant, to diagnose you because hormones or just adulting changes you. But obviously if you're having suicidal thoughts, like for a long time, months or years, or if you self-harm, there's some things that are more extreme that I would say you should always see a mental health professional about.
And I wanted to say something about that. If you're worried that you're having symptoms, go talk to your doctor. Go get evaluated and see, because my son, like Rachel said, a lot of times they do diagnose them younger, but a lot of times they like to wait and see, because maybe it is depression, maybe it's anxiety, maybe it's some growing pains. So some psychiatrists and doctors want to be a little bit more careful, even though, yes, some get diagnosed later. My son's psychiatrist wanted to wait and see a little bit more of his behaviors. But if you're worried yourself, whoever you are out there, go get evaluated. Like she said, it's normal to wonder. But if you think that you may be and you're just nervous about it, go get evaluated. Be open. Go get evaluated, and the doctors will help you.
Oh, it's so important. Sonja, you make such a relatable link in your book, fairly early on in the book, with your eating disorder. And you used a phrase which is used in so many different mental health challenge situations, where you were trying to fill a bottomless hole. And the question is, that ties with so many different people in situations that don't have your diagnosis. In the course of this book and in your going around the country to share this message, do you have people reaching out to you that, don't maybe have a diagnosed mental illness, don't have bipolar, but are identifying, have read your book or heard your message, and just are identifying with those incredible human feelings that you share so openly?
Oh, yes. Yes. I get personal emails from people, obviously, with mental health challenges, or family members are, but I get people so many times, which, actually that surprised me, because all I know is what I know, right? My experience. But it surprised me. I have had hundreds of people contact me or talk to me and say, I can relate to you. I don't have a mental illness, but I have eaten to self-medicate myself, or I have been depressed, or I couldn't get out of bed, or I didn't feel like I could shower. And it's been really actually rewarding to let them know that, we're all connected. A lot of us have similar emotions and struggles, even if it's not a mental illness. And so, yes, they have.
Well, I can speak that I was reading your book, and about 15 times was saying, like, I totally get this. This is it. I totally understand this. I think we have one more question, and then and then I'm going to wrap up with all of you and give some information to the audience. And I love this question. So I think it's around in chapter 19. You find, for the first time, you use the title of the book. You say that you were basically now handed this impossible life to try and manage. And as I looked at the title of the book, and you see, like, here's a phrase identifying a challenge. If you were to put a book title on your life since and on your recovery, if you were to write a title today about your present, what would that title be?
I already know, because it's going to be our last book in their series, A Possible Life. That is what my life is now. It is a possible life, and a beautiful life I have. Beautiful.
Well, I don't know. I don't want to speak for Patty, but I think the two of us would probably agree. having had conversations with you up until now.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, we at Seacoast Mental Health Center, we really want to thank both Sonja and Rachel, both of you, and Patty. But your openness, your sharing, it is the thing that changes stigma. Putting a face to these titles and these words and these conditions that are out there, and making us all realize how human it is and how relatable pieces of it are, even if you don't have a diagnosis. That's what starts breaking down these barriers. And from my heart, thank you, and from our center's heart, thank you. I think you've really spoken to members of our community, and we really appreciate your time. Again, for everybody out there, the book is called An Impossible Life by Sonja Wasden and Rachel Siddoway. Highly recommended. You can buy it on Amazon. You can buy it at your local bookstores. You can listen to it on Audible. You won't put it down. So we do really highly recommend it. And most importantly, if anybody out there, or if one of your friends or families, if you hear, are feeling helpless or hopeless, if you feel like you're in crisis, if you are just in the dark and you can't feel like you can get out of the dark, you're not alone. There's always help out there. We have 2 emergency services lines that are open and available 24/7, 365. You can call 603-431-6703 or 603-772-2710. Both of those numbers are on our website. You can also, if in immediate crisis, call 911. You do not have to go through that alone. And I think that Sonja is absolute living proof, and her family behind her is living proof that no one is really ever alone. And we are also always there for you. So thanks to the audience. Thank you to the panelists. This has been a really fabulous, wonderful experience.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sonja and Rachel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.